For more than 200 years, Oak Island has been treated like a puzzle with missing pieces. Every generation believed it was one discovery away from solving the mystery. Each new shaft, each new tunnel, each new artifact was framed as progress. But what came out in the season finale wasn't progress at all. It was a correction, one that quietly shattered the foundation of everything we thought we knew. The discovery itself didn't arrive with explosions or dramatic celebrations. It came almost silently, buried in data, measurements, in a detail so subtle that it had been ignored for decades. When the team reviewed the final findings together, the mood changed. There was hesitation, confusion, then disbelief, because the evidence didn't support the long-standing belief that Oak Island was centered around a single vertical treasure deposit. Instead, it suggested something far more deliberate, far more controlled. For years, the dominant theory assumed that whoever hid the treasure did so in the most obvious way, deep underground, protected by traps and flood tunnels. But the new information showed that many of those traps were not defensive mechanisms at all. They were boundaries, limits, markers. The island wasn't designed to stop intruders. It was designed to redirect them. This realization flipped the entire story on its head. If the original builders wanted to hide something, they could have buried it anywhere. Instead, they invested enormous effort into shaping behavior, guiding movement, and punishing deviation. That only makes sense if the goal wasn't just secrecy, but control. Control over who got close. Control over how far they went. Control over what they were allowed to see. The most unsettling part was how well this theory fit the past. Every major failure suddenly made sense. Every collapsed shaft, every flooded tunnel, every abandoned dig site lined up with moments where searchers unknowingly crossed invisible lines. They weren't unlucky. They were off. And the island responded exactly as it was designed to. When this sank in, the treasure itself became secondary. Gold, artifacts, relics, those were no longer the main question. The real mystery became motive. Why go to such extreme lengths? Why build a system so complex that it could confuse explorers centuries later? Why leave just enough clues to invite pursuit, but never enough to allow certainty? The finale didn't just suggest a new theory. It quietly erased the old ones. It forced everyone watching to accept a hard truth. Oak Island was never a simple treasure hunt. It was a message engineered across time, waiting for someone to finally understand how to read it. And once that realization hits, there's no going back to the old story. Because the island was never hiding treasure in the ground. It was hiding the truth in plain sight. For generations. The mystery of Oak Island has been built on what explorers found. Shafts, timbers, coins, tools, each discovery was treated as a breakthrough. But the season finale revealed something far more unsettling. The most important clue on the island wasn't something newly uncovered. It was something that had been seen, recorded, and dismissed over and over again for more than 200 years, buried in old survey notes, faded maps, and early excavation logs. Was a detail so ordinary that no one questioned it. A repeated measurement, a recurring distance, a strange consistency in where things appeared damned where they didn't. For decades, these patterns were brushed aside as coincidence, chalked up to the limitations of old tools or human error. But when modern technology re-examined those same records, the illusion fell apart. What emerged was a trail hiding in plain sight. Every major artifact, no matter how insignificant, shared a relationship with this overlooked detail. Not directly, but proportionally. The distances weren't random. They were calculated. When layered together, they formed a map that had never been drawn because no one thought to connect the dots. The clue wasn't missing. It was fragmented. This realization was deeply uncomfortable because it implied that the island had been trying to communicate all along. The early searchers didn't fail because they lacked effort or courage. They failed because they were looking for answers in isolation, not in sequence. The builders of Oak Island didn't leave one grand sign pointing to the truth. They scattered pieces across time, trusting that only patience and perspective would reveal the whole. What made this discovery truly shocking was its simplicity. No advanced machinery was required to see it. No new excavation was necessary. All it took was stepping back and asking a question no one had asked before. What if the island's clues weren't meant to be understood individually? What if they only made sense when viewed together? Suddenly, the past looked different. The famous discoveries that once seemed disconnected now felt deliberate. Even the gaps, places where nothing was found, took on new meaning. Absence wasn't failure. It was part of the design. The island wasn't hiding information randomly. It was spacing it out, forcing future generations to either give up or evolve. This changes the entire emotional weight of the story. The mystery of Oak Island is no longer about stubborn Earth resisting human ambition. It's about human impatience colliding with long-term planning. Someone centuries ago anticipated that their work would outlive them. They trusted that time itself would protect the secret better than any trap or tunnel. The finale made one thing painfully clear. The key to Oak Island was never lost. It was ignored. And now that it's finally been noticed, every past assumption feels fragile. Because if such a crucial detail could hide in plain sight for over 200 years, it raises a chilling question. What else have we been staring at without truly seeing? For years, the failures on Oak Island were explained with simple excuses. Bad luck, unstable ground, poor timing, each collapse, each flooded shaft, each abandoned dig was treated as an isolated disaster. But the season finale forced a chilling realization. None of those failures were random. They followed a pattern so precise that once it was seen, it couldn't be unseen. When the team laid out the full history of excavation side by side, something unexpected appeared. The same types of failures kept repeating in the same kinds of locations. Not the same spots, but the same relationships, certain distances, certain angles, certain depths. The island wasn't just reacting to digging, it was responding to where that digging happened. This was the moment when the narrative shifted from misfortune to intention. Because natural chaos doesn't repeat itself with mathematical consistency, but design does. Every major collapse seemed to occur when searchers moved beyond an invisible boundary. Every flood happened when shafts drifted away from a central alignment. The island didn't collapse everywhere. It collapsed selectively, almost as if it were enforcing rules that no one knew existed. At first, this idea sounded impossible. How could people centuries ago predict where future searchers would dig? How could they influence outcomes generations later? But the more data was examined, the harder it became to deny. The original builders didn't need to predict human behavior perfectly. They only needed to shape the environment by reinforcing certain paths and destabilizing others. They ensured that anyone digging blindly would be pushed back toward specific zones or punished for straying too far. This reframed every past failure. Those early treasure hunters weren't unlucky. They were being corrected. The island wasn't fighting discovery. It was guiding it using frustration and collapse as tools. The emotional weight of this realization was heavy. It meant that countless years of effort, money, and hope weren't wasted because the treasure didn't exist, but because the searchers didn't understand the language of the island. They treated it like a battlefield when it was actually a puzzle. Even more unsettling was how patient this system was. 200 years passed, and the pattern never broke. That kind of consistency requires planning on a scale few people can comprehend. It suggests that the creators of Oak Island believed their secret was important enough to survive centuries of interference. Important enough to be defended not by force, but by structure. By the time the finale ended, one truth stood out above all others. Oak Island was never chaotic. It was precise. Every failure told the same silent story. Follow the path or face the consequence. And now that the pattern has finally been recognized, the mystery feels deeper than ever. Because if the island has been guiding the search this whole time, then the real question isn't where the treasure is. It's where the island wants us to go next. For decades, the strange symbols, markings, and carved stones connected to Oak Island were treated like background noise. Interesting, yes, but unreliable. Many believed they were coincidences, misinterpretations, or even outright fabrications added later to fuel the legend. But the season finale delivered a moment that forced everyone to stop and reconsider. What if those markings were never meant to be decorative, symbolic, or mysterious on their own? What if they were instructions? When the markings were re-examined with fresh eyes, a disturbing consistency emerged. The symbols weren't random. They followed rules: spacing, repetition, orientation. Everything obeyed a structure. Some symbols only appeared near specific features. Others never appeared together. This wasn't art. It was language. And like any language, it only makes sense when you understand its context. What made this revelation so unsettling was timing. These symbols had been documented long before modern treasure hunting began. That meant whoever left them expected the message to survive centuries of erosion, human interference, and skepticism. They weren't trying to be obvious. They were trying to be selective. Only someone patient enough and careful enough would notice the pattern. As researchers compared the markings to old engineering notations and early measurement systems, a chilling possibility took shape. The symbols didn't warn people to stay away. They warned people to slow down. To observe, to follow a sequence. Certain markings appeared near zones that later collapsed. Others were positioned near areas where diggers inexplicably avoided disaster. The difference wasn't luck. It was interpretation. This changes the emotional meaning of everything that came before. Those who ignored the markings weren't defying superstition. They were ignoring guidance. The island wasn't silent. It was speaking in a voice that demanded patience and respect. And every time that voice was dismissed, the consequences followed. Even more disturbing was the implication that the warning wasn't just about physical danger. Some symbols seemed to mark thresholds, points of no return. Areas where knowledge once uncovered could not be forgotten or undone. That suggests the builders feared not just theft, but exposure. Whatever they buried, documented, or protected may have had consequences far beyond material value. By decoding these markings as warnings rather than curiosities, the finale reframed Oak Island as something far more serious than a treasure site. It became a controlled environment carefully designed to test those who approached it. Not everyone was meant to reach the end. Not everyone was meant to understand the message. And that is what makes this realization so haunting. The warning was always there, not hidden deep underground, but etched into the surface of the story itself. Ignored for centuries, misunderstood for generations, and now finally decoded right at the moment when humanity may be closest to crossing the very line those ancient voices tried so hard to protect. For most of its history, the mystery of Oak Island has been driven by a single assumption that something valuable was buried there. Gold, silver, religious artifacts, lost treasure from a vanished civilization. Every theory, no matter how different, shared one belief that the reward was material, something you could touch, measure, and carry away. But the season finale quietly introduced an idea that unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. What if the real objective was never wealth at all? As new evidence was examined, the nature of the discoveries began to feel strangely incomplete. Valuable enough to provoke obsession, yet never enough to confirm a payoff. Just fragments, hints, traces. This pattern didn't match the logic of hiding treasure. It matched the logic of concealing something far more abstract. Something that didn't need to be extracted, only protected. The structures, alignments, and mechanisms uncovered across the island suddenly took on a different meaning. They were far too elaborate to guard simple riches. If gold were the goal, a single deep shaft would have sufficed. Instead, Oak Island revealed layers of planning, redundancy, and misdirection. That level of effort suggests the builders feared something more dangerous than theft. They feared understanding. This idea changed everything. The so-called treasure might be information, a record, a truth that could disrupt power, faith, or history itself. Something that once revealed could not be and unlike gold, knowledge grows more dangerous the more people believe it. The finale hinted that what was hidden may have been intentionally incomplete. Not a single object, but a system pieces scattered across the island designed to be assembled only by those who recognized the pattern. This would explain why no one discovery ever feels final. The island doesn't reward force, it rewards comprehension. That realization is deeply unsettling because it reframes centuries of obsession. Countless lives were spent chasing the wrong prize, not because the builders were cruel, but because they assumed only a certain kind of seeker would ever make it far enough to understand. The rest would stop when the gold failed to appear. Even more chilling is the possibility that the treasure was never meant to be recovered at all. It may have been meant to remain hidden until the world was ready or to be buried forever, if that day never came. That kind of thinking requires a long view of history, one that measures time in centuries, not lifetimes. By the end of the finale, one truth became impossible to ignore. Oak Island may not be guarding riches. It may be guarding responsibility. And that raises a haunting question. If the island finally gives up its secret, are we prepared for what comes with it? Because some treasures don't make you rich. They change you on, not always, for the better. As the season drew to a close, something unexpected crept into the atmosphere on Oak Island. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't triumph. It was urgency. A quiet, unsettling sense that whatever window had been open for centuries was beginning to narrow. The finale didn't announce a deadline, but the signs were impossible to ignore. The team wasn't just getting closer to the truth. They were running out of time. Subtle changes in the environment raised new concerns. Shifts in underground pressure. Water behavior that no longer followed historical patterns. Areas that once seemed stable began to react differently. These weren't sudden disasters, but they felt like warnings, subtle indicators that the system beneath the island was changing. Whether natural or engineered, the effect was the same. Delay now carried consequences. Then there were the human limits. Years of excavation had pushed technology, funding, and endurance to their edge. Every season demands more resources, more precision, and more risk. The finale made it clear that the next phase wouldn't allow for trial and error. One wrong move could undo years of progress or trigger something irreversible. What made this realization so powerful was how it tied back to the island's design. If Oak Island truly operates as a controlled system, then time itself may be part of that system. Perhaps the builders anticipated that the island would evolve, that conditions would shift, that future searchers would face not just physical obstacles, but temporal ones. Waiting too long might be just as dangerous as moving too fast. The team also began to understand that modern exposure changes everything. Satellite imaging, public attention, and global scrutiny mean the mystery can't remain isolated forever. Once certain information becomes public, it can't be contained. That creates pressure not just to dig, but to decide. When do you stop? When do you reveal? And who gets to choose? This ticking clock adds a moral dimension to the hunt. It's no longer